This is Letter from America. Today's topic is officials now admit that ZANU-PF violence is skyrocketing public support for CCC. In other words, the more the ZANU-PF thugs assault, inflict violence on members of the Citizens Coalition for Change, the more public support there is for CCC. Politically motivated violence, especially before elections, is now ingrained in ZANU-PF campaign politics. It has been this way for every election since 2000. Almost every day, a ZANU-PF official makes it public and clear that ZANU-PF will use violence to win the 2023 elections. But despite this ongoing ZANU-PF violence, Zimbabweans have massively rejected ZANU-PF, and their message has repeatedly been that ZANU-PF is no longer relevant to their lives. After 42 years of misrule by ZANU-PF, Zimbabwe is in a dilapidated state, and ZANU-PF is now a liability to the people of Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF has got a trail of broken promises. When he took over from Mugabe, Mnangagwa made promises that he said he was going to accomplish in the next 5 years. Here were his promises. Put job creation first. Have zero tolerance to corruption. Establish a modern healthcare system for all. Develop infrastructure worthy of New Zimbabwe. Generate unprecedented educational and employment opportunities for our youths. Those were promises that were made by Mnangagwa. And here is Mnangagwa's signature. But what has happened after these 5 years? All those promises have been a massive failure. And the people of Zimbabwe are asking this question: why should we vote for a person whose promises have all been a massive failure? ZANU-PF knows that. ZANU-PF has nothing now to promise Zimbabweans, because ZANU-PF knows that their previous promises have been nothing but an empty sounding drum. Last year alone, human rights activists, especially the Zimbabwean Peace Project, reported that more than 80% of the politically motivated violence in Zimbabwe was perpetrated by ZANU-PF with the active assistance of the police. Violence, as I said earlier, is in ZANU-PF's DNA. It is one of several strategies ZANU-PF has adopted to stay in power. It is not surprising that ZANU-PF does not campaign peacefully like the CCC. ZANU-PF knows it has lost the support and confidence of almost every Zimbabwean, including members of the ZANU-PF party itself. CCC Vice President Lynette Makore said this of ZANU-PF: "You do not inflict violence on a woman to make her love you. If she no longer loves you, she will never love you, no matter how much violence you subject her to. And this is exactly what ZANU-PF is doing to Zimbabweans. ZANU-PF is using violence to get Zimbabweans to vote for ZANU-PF. That will never happen. ZANU-PF is now aware that Zimbabweans are immune, have now become immune to ZANU-PF violence. No matter how much they have beaten them, Zimbabweans have consistently and persistently voted for first the MDC alliance and now CCC. One member of ZANU-PF admitted that ZANU-PF should stop inflicting violence on CCC people because that is increasing public support for CCC. He said supporters for CCC are exponentially increasing, so much that there are just too many to beat. In Shona, he said, vanhu veCCC wanyanya kuwanda, hatichakwanise kuvarowa, ngatichiregerai. According to an online publication, ZANU-PF supporters are threatening to unleash violence on opposition supporters ahead of the 2023 elections. Despite calls by Crisis in Zimbabwe coalition for ZANU-PF to denounce the acts of thuggery by its supporters, the ruling party has chosen to remain mum on the issue. Given ZANU-PF's well-known track record of using violence during election periods, Zimbabweans have every reason to fear for yet another bloody election, the online publication wrote. ZANU-PF youth militia, the armed forces as well as war veterans have been the major perpetrators of violence against opposition supporters. During the bloody 2008 election, around 500 opposition supporters lost their lives as ZANU-PF used violence to cling on to power. Elections in Zimbabwe have often been associated with violence, and in 2018, despite promises for a new dispensation, soldiers killed 6 people in cold blood following protests over electoral fraud. The army killings attracted global condemnation, but despite this, ZANU-PF continued to victimize opposition supporters, and cases of abduction, rape, and torture were recorded, with the army being the main perpetrators. Elections in Zimbabwe have often been associated with violence, and in 2018, despite promises of a new dispensation, soldiers have gone rampant, killing people. It is quite apparent that violence and electoral fraud are the key strategies by ZANU-PF to retain power. Ahead of the 2023 elections, the government has revived the National Youth Training Service, or the so-called Green Bombers. And knowing the role of youth from the Border Gezi Training Institute in unleashing violence, we have reason to fear for the West. President Emerson Mnangagwa has also urged war veterans, who are also notorious for unleashing violence against opposition supporters, to campaign for ZANU-PF ahead of the 2023 elections. What are the political DNA results or facts? By DNA results, we are referring to ZANU's use of violence to try to win the elections. Just last year, CCC won 60% of the by-elections that were held during the year 2022. CCC was barely 2 months old when, just like the biblical David, it defeated the 62-year-old Goliath ZANU-PF in a playing field that was not level because it greatly disadvantaged CCC. CCC was launched on 22 January 2022. Many people were very pessimistic that CCC would establish a competitive presence before the March 26 elections. And to make matters worse, CCC was broke, it was penniless, because its share of the funding under the Political Parties Finance Act had been illegally stolen and given to Monzora, who now dubiously claimed to be the president of MDC Alliance. Of the $500 million available under the Political Parties Finance Act, ZANU-PF received the lion's share of $350,150,000, translating to 70.3%, while Monzora's MDC was given $149,850,000. The Morgan Richard Tsvangirai party head office had also been seized by armed police and given again to Monzora. ZANU-PF also used the resources of the captured state, the police, the army to suppress CCC. 6 of CCC rallies were illegally banned by the police. There is no provision in the Constitution that gives the police the power to ban political rallies. Where CCC rallies were permitted, this was under some of the most ridiculous restrictive conditions. In one rally, the police limited the CCC rally to no more than 200 people. In other rallies, police restricted singing, dances, and celebrating. ZANU-PF thugs used violence against CCC rallies without police restraint. Only after mounting public pressure did the police reluctantly arrest thugs that had wreaked havoc at a Gokwe rally where a CCC supporter was killed. But the thugs who had been arrested were released the next day. Yet ZANU-PF and Monzora rallies were held without any restrictions and without needing any police permission at all. Instead of condemning the ZANU-PF thugs, Zimbabwe's Vice President Constantino Chiwenga compared the opposition to insects that must be destroyed. You see how we crush lice with a stone, he told a rally of the ruling party. That is what we are going to do to the CCC. Chiwenga's crush CCC like lice speech appeared to be a coded message to the thugs to go ahead and bully and brutalize CCC. He never condemned the ZANU-PF thugs who used spears and axes in an act of terrorism that left nearly 20 people injured and 1 dead. The police also played their role in harassing CCC supporters. They brought water tanks to disperse CCC rallies and had a very heavy, intimidating presence to scare off people. Not to be outdone, ZEC proved, as always, incompetent in running free and fair elections. They messed up CCC images on the ballots in the hope that voters would find it difficult to recognize the CCC candidates. They printed the ballots in black and white to avoid the easily recognizable and loved yellow background for CCC candidates. ZANU-PF engaged in the widespread vote buying, yet ZEC remained silent. ZANU-PF engaged in widespread intimidation by traditional leaders, yet ZEC remained silent. ZANU-PF violated many electoral laws, yet ZEC remained silent. The overwhelming military power of the ZANU-PF Goliath and its capacity to use the state to terrorize and intimidate voters was undeniable. Well, then, in that case, what was the CCC's strength? How did the CCC manage to win so spectacularly in face of all that overwhelming ZANU-PF violence? Well, CCC under Advocate Nelson Chamisa became the flag bearer of opposition politics in Zimbabwe. It is still today. It carries the torch of MDC, which was formed in 1999. ZANU-PF was widely rejected by Zimbabweans as far back as 2000. The populist leader became the late Morgan Richard Tsvangirai, who led the MDC until his death in February 2018. Tsvangirai's chosen successor was Nelson Chamisa, who by popular demand became the leader of the MDC alliance. Just like his predecessor, Tsvangirai's victory in 2008 elections, Chamisa won the 2018 elections, but ZANU-PF and ZEC reversed both the election results of 2008 and 2018 and gave victory to Mugabe and to Mnangagwa. How do we know this? Well, in some unrehearsed speech, the late Mugabe was in later years to say MDC had won 73% of the vote to ZANU-PF's less than 30%. In the 2018 elections, Chamisa won the presidential elections, but ZEC manipulated the figures to give Mnangagwa the victory. A petition in which the Constitutional Court against the election results ended with the court ruling against the petition. The court refused to admit some overwhelming evidence which was based on ZEC's own database. One clear evidence of ZEC and court biases against the MDC and now CCC has been the way they routinely dismiss MDC and the CCC's petitions. But they do not give the full ruling. The full text of the ruling on the 2008 petition by MDC and the 2018 petition by the MDC Alliance has not been given up to this day. Chamisa and the CCC strength lie in the strong mass-based support for the party. CCC has had an empowering effect on the people of Zimbabwe. For years, ZANU-PF has used violence and other tactics to intimidate people into submission. That may well explain the number of people who did not turn up to vote. ZANU-PF prides itself in that it controls the rural areas. It's a false narrative. That the party is popular in rural areas. But what has ZANU-PF done to improve the lives of rural Zimbabweans in the past 42 years that the party has been in power? Just go to the rural areas and see for yourself the pathetic living conditions. According to some statistics, about 5 million Zimbabweans in urban areas and 10 million in rural areas are eligible to vote. How does ZANU-PF win the rural votes? By intimidation and violence. It is easier to intimidate the rural population than urban people. As a matter of fact, rural people know very well that they were abandoned by ZANU-PF in terms of infrastructural development. They know ZANU-PF does not care about uplifting their conditions of life, but they are now waking up to the realization that there is national dissatisfaction with the ZANU-PF and that the CCC is the rallying point for that mass uprising against ZANU-PF. This is why ZANU-PF has declared the rural areas a no-go for CCC. Chamisa's motorcade was regularly blocked by the police and rented ZANU-PF crowds. In one case, a ZANU-PF thug fired a gun at Chamisa's car. The bullet narrowly missed Chamisa and by a whisker. The combination of mismanagement of the economy, corruption, violence, and trampling of basic human rights, and especially all the efforts to block CCC from participating in elections, is bringing more support for the beleaguered party CCC. And ZANU-PF is losing public support. Hundreds of thousands of ZANU-PF membership cards are gathering spiders' webs in some abandoned warehouse. No one is interested in buying ZANU-PF cards. Some of the party insiders are now saying loudly, ZANU-PF chinu chawora. ZANU-PF is rotten. And the David and Goliath equation is apocalyptically fulfilled. But the unanswered question in this situation in Zimbabwe is, what will Zimbabweans do? Will they allow themselves to be slaughtered like sheep? There are slogans some human rights activists have been chanting in calls to action by the Zimbabweans. Some of these popular slogans are Zvakwana, Sokwanele, enough, Kusikufa ndekupi. We are many, there are few.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of